Welcome, everyone. I am Gui Valente, and this is the Valente Brothers podcast. I'm here with Pedro Valente
Hello, everyone.
and Joaquim Valente.
Happy to be here.
So we're back for one more episode. Today we're going to talk about how Jiu-Jitsu, once again, right, in history, we have some examples of how this already happened, but once again, Jiu-Jitsu is on the top of the hill in many different aspects, and one of them being how so many business leaders, politicians, so many successful individuals now are training Jiu-Jitsu and often recommending Jiu-Jitsu as one of the most powerful educational tools that we have, not only for children, but for adults as well, coping with stress. We often mention how Jiu-Jitsu can be very therapeutical, if taught properly, of course, connected to its philosophy, connected to a proper training protocol and educational aspects. So I think it would be a good topic for us to discuss. Why is that? Why do you believe, Pedro, that Jiu-Jitsu, once again, maybe we can mention when it happened earlier in history, but why Jiu-Jitsu now is so popular again?
And it's really incredible to look at Jiu-Jitsu practitioners and everything that they achieved and to observe that very successful individuals, and I would like to mention one, the President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, who
That's your favorite one.
Yes, 120 years ago, Theodore Roosevelt was training Jiu-Jitsu in the White House. In 2025, we're celebrating 120 years of that event. And at that time, some of the most important business leaders, both in America and in Europe, were training Jiu-Jitsu, not speaking of Japan. And now this is happening again. And I think it's because these leaders in their industries realize how beneficial Jiu-Jitsu can be. And the number one benefit, in my opinion, is confidence. How Jiu-Jitsu develops confidence in practitioners. Confidence is an essential characteristic for anyone who wants to be successful, no matter what the endeavor might be. A politician who's running a campaign, if he doesn't transmit confidence, he won't be able to get a lot of votes. A doctor, if he doesn't transmit confidence to his patients, a surgeon, they won't be comfortable having surgery with that doctor. Anyone who, as I said, wants to succeed needs to be confident. And Jiu-Jitsu is a source of confidence, unlike any other activity.
You mentioned external success, right? But I believe that Jiu-Jitsu also contributes immensely with our internal success. When I say internal success, I'm talking about our health. I'm talking about our physical health, our emotional health. We can achieve a lot many times externally, meaning different business accomplishments, meaning wealth, but we might still have some very intense internal issues and struggles. How do you feel, Joaquim, that Jiu-Jitsu addresses that?
I think Jiu-Jitsu creates an ability for you to expose, growing up, we used to always play around and say that everything comes out on the mat, right? You can really get to know a human being on the mat. And that practice, day in, day out of training and taking classes, you learn that Jiu-Jitsu, in its premise, should be human intelligence over brute strength. And when you're looking for maximum efficiency and you're applying human intelligence to something that is so primitive, right? It's so physical. It's so bringing us almost to the origins, you start to realize that those concepts can be applied to everything. So when you're in an uncomfortable position and you actually need to have patience and not just try to get out because you want to get out, you'll start making connections in other areas in your life, dealing with anxiety, dealing with fear, right? Dealing with the discomfort sometimes of that you don't have the control, and situations and people might put you into that. And you start applying the same concepts that we learn in Jiu-Jitsu. And I think that someone who has achieved success in any area, for them to be able to have something that has such a practical knowledge and such a practical way to be able to overcome the obstacles that Guy mentioned, that just motivates them to train more. That just motivates them to want to train in a more intense and profound way. And Jiu-Jitsu allows for this, right? I think there's a lot of activities that we think about in our life that doesn't allow us to really go profound, that really allow us to go deep and to have philosophical conversations and deep conversations. And Jiu-Jitsu allows for this. And we can have these conversations and we can have these ideas and these thoughts in an internal way with us as we analyze a class, as we analyze a sparring match. But we can also have this with our teachers, and this creates really an opportunity for growth. And that's why I believe there's so many people who are interested in training Jiu-Jitsu. And our school has always been like that, right? I think from day one that Pedro started teaching in Miami, we had politicians training with us. We had lawyers. There's a lot of lawyers that like Jiu-Jitsu. I think if we had to point out the two biggest professions training Jiu-Jitsu, I would say is lawyers.
In our school.
In our school, lawyers and doctors.
Lawyers and doctors, yeah.
Right? And so I think that's great.
Yeah, what I believe that Jiu-Jitsu really does is it connects us, like you said, Joaquim, to some of our basic instincts, right? We often like to study the old pyramid, the hierarchy of needs, of human needs of Abraham Maslow. And in that, self-preservation is up there, right? I believe is number 2. And Jiu-Jitsu connects us with that. I have many students who tell me, one of the things that I'm noticing now when they're initiating their journey, they tell me, now, every time I see someone who's big and strong, I feel a little safer. Before, I would always feel a little bit intimidated. And I think growing up, we all went through that. You go to a party, you see someone who's very strong, big, you're like, well, I better not bump into this person. But because you train Jiu-Jitsu, even as children, you feel like you don't have to take advantage of that, and that happens maybe if you're practicing without the philosophy, right? But you feel that, well, if that person attacks me, I'll know what to do. And I think that has a huge impact.
And that's life-changing.
Life. Yeah.
Life-changing. And even for people who have achieved a lot of external success, as you said, material success, but they're lacking in this other area, they might feel it even more because they feel very powerful, but they know deep inside that there's still an area in their lives where they're still weak. And so when they achieve this physical power and they feel powerful physically, it really has a big effect on them.
Yeah, and one of the biggest contributions that we have made, and I think it's still very small in terms of notoriety, because we've never been really trying to be too famous or trying to teach Jiu-Jitsu in a commercial way. We really care about those that are here with us. But I think this really needs to be out there. I think that Jiu-Jitsu is not about bravado. Jiu-Jitsu is not about trying to be tough or look tough when you start practicing Jiu-Jitsu. And we still see a little bit of that, or a lot of that. I think MMA, in a way, generally speaking, contributes to that, right? But a true Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, if you understand the philosophy, if you understand, for example, the concepts taught in Sun Tzu, Art of War, you don't have to show your enemy that you're about to attack or even that you're ready to defend yourself. of course, sometimes that could work in preemptive ways, but never in an arrogant way.
Correct.
Never in a with hubris.
Correct.
And many times we still see that in jiu-jitsu. And our approach, I'm very happy, Joaquim, when someone tells me, well, you don't look like you are a jiu-jitsu practitioner. You don't have, crazy cauliflower ears, or, right? A lot of those comments, I'm sure you guys have heard that before too. And I'm very proud of that, because we've always practiced jiu-jitsu as a way of life. And even when it was cool for jiu-jitsu practitioners to have cauliflower ears or to look a certain way or to have a certain dog, we never did that. Because our teacher, Hélio Gracie, never did that.
The thing is that, go ahead, Joaquim.
No, I was just going to say, and it goes back to what Pedro mentioned earlier about the confidence. That confidence should result in a better ability for you to de-escalate a confrontation. That confidence should result for you being a more benevolent person. That confidence should result on you looking, like Guy just described, like someone who's calm, that has emotional balance, right? And unfortunately, when you give someone, just like a gun, right? If you give someone a gun without the philosophy, without the instruction, without the respect that should exist, and even the discipline for the safety of manipulating a firearm, that could create problems.
Yeah.
Right? And Jiu-Jitsu is the same way. It should be seen with that level of responsibility. I would hope that everyone would train, because I think the world would be a safer place.
Correct. Because
But it requires concepts in that training that many times are not present when the instruction of Jiu-Jitsu is being taught in different ways.
that's very interesting, because I believe that in order for someone to be humble, they need to be confident. For somebody to be true, humility requires confidence and courage.
And let's not confuse humility with weakness.
No. Tolerance requires courage and confidence. So you might say, as Guy just mentioned, how come we see MMA fighters who are very confident physically, very tough fighters, behave in such ways, arrogant ways, without any humility? How come we see BJJ champions many times act in those ways? I think it's because there is an imbalance. True confidence is not only physical. There's a very famous expression in Japanese that we have on the wall of our mat, an inscription, which says, Bun Buryodo, which means that the way...
Well, it's right below the pictures of our mentors.
Of our mentors. And it says that the way is in the combination of the martial arts and the intellectual arts, the academic arts. So you must develop your physical confidence, but you also must develop your intellectual confidence. You also must develop your emotional confidence. You also must develop your spiritual confidence. Only when you have holistic confidence, if I can call it that way, will you be able to feel humble, or to be humble, and to be tolerant, and to be benevolent. But sometimes if you achieve too much physical confidence but a very low intellectual confidence, then that's going to cause you to become even more angry and to express that insecurity that still exists in ways that are very negative.
And I think the spiritual and emotional is very important, because you could have the intellectual,
Yes.
you could have the physical, and still be insecure because of the lack of the emotional and the spiritual confidence.
Yeah, it's not so. Usually we say it's the pen and the sword, but it's more than the pen and the sword.
Yes.
It's more, because you have to, you need to have those skills that Joaquim just mentioned in order to use the pen properly.
Yes.
In order to use the sword properly.
And that's why the 753 code is so
Complete.
amazing, because it approaches, the reason why we created the 753 code was exactly to be able to touch on all those different areas, and something that is almost tangible, right? Because you can practice every day. It's not like a philosophical thing that's out there and you're like, okay, how do I put this into practice? No, every day you can look over. I have a student that he tells me that he reads the book 3 times a week. He's like, I read the book already, but he opens up the book like almost like one of those books that you have on your, side bed table, and you open up at night in a random page and you pick that and you read it and you reflect upon and you see how that concept, was connected to something that happened in your life in that week and how you can improve on it. And it's a constant work, but that constant work is going to take you in the path of developing the confidence in all those areas.
And it's something that we should develop as we get older, is the ability to self-reflect, self-reflection. We learned that with our teacher, Grandmaster Elio, and I think that you can use the 753 code as a guide in this self-reflection exercise that we should always practice, that we should always do. And when you talk about the pen and the sword, and we say it's not just the pen and the sword, if you substitute the sword for a firearm, I think that's even more clear. It becomes even more clear how you need to have the emotional training, right? You need to be balanced in that respect as well.
I agree.
Pedro, and it's important that we understand how this applies even for children, or I should say, especially for children. Because growing up, we've been practicing Jujitsu, it's fair to say, even before we could walk, right? The philosophy of Jujitsu has been around us even before we were born in our household. And many times, parents ask us, how many times should my son or daughter practice a week? And here at our school, we recommend 2 to 3 times. Some students take a private lesson, a couple private lessons. Sometimes they take a couple group classes. But 2 to 3, maybe 4 times, not more than that. And some instructors or teachers, some parents are like, why? But my son really likes it. He wants to practice every single day. How would you answer that question?
We don't want them to burn out. And also, most importantly, the balance that I spoke of before.
Yes.
We want to make sure that they're well-rounded and they're doing different activities.
Correct.
Right? Because if you only do one, you're going to lack the diversity, the versatility that are so important for a child to be able to grow in a positive way.
Because I understand burning out, and I think that happens in most cases. But we have examples of kids today in BJJ, in wrestling, even in MMA in some countries, that start in, I think, even before their teens.
Yes.
And they go all the way. And that can be done. It is possible to do that.
That's a different. Then we can talk about how much they're going to love it, how much they're going to do it. But that's a separate topic.
I know.
But think about.
But if we had a school, because if we look at what the definition of what Jiu-Jitsu is, I think they could train every day.
They could, but we could have a whole conversation about mentally their relationship with Jiu-Jitsu, what it would be, and that's a separate story.
Because the 753 code allows you to train every day in a different area,
Exactly.
and
that's different.
but that's what Jiu-Jitsu is.
Okay, I agree.
So when at least especially if we have a close
when you
connection.
said if we had a school, meaning if we had an
an academic school,
where children
which
come
we're
every
actually
day.
working on trying to bring the 753 code
To schools.
into the academic
World.
schools and environments, because that's where we feel there's going to be the biggest benefit for the youth.
Absolutely.
Right? I believe I went to school for criminology, and I was having actually this discussion the other day with a friend of mine who is in law enforcement, and a lot of my study was looking at crime and looking at these, situations in which communities suffer so much with crime. And you see actions and you see proposals from politicians on how to change. And I'm a big believer, and the same way that our dad was a big believer, that the only way that you will create change in the long run is through education. And that's why bringing the 753 code into the educational environment, I think, has the biggest benefits. But touching on what Guy said, part of me telling a parent that we recommend 2 to 3 times a week counts on the job of the parents at home in fulfilling the necessity to work on the rest of the 753 code on their own time.
Every day, sure.
It has to be a constant topic of discussion, a constant topic of reference to, in connection to so many things that are happening in a kid's life.
Collaboration.
Collaboration for them to be able to evolve. If they think like, no, I'm gonna, bring the kid for 45 minutes to an hour, 2 times a week to the school, and that's it.
No. Very important point. Parents out there, train Jiu-Jitsu. That's the greatest way for you to motivate your children. Number one, to continue in their journey, right? For us, it was always so nice to see our dad training. Our mom never practiced, I believe, the physical aspect of Jiu-Jitsu, but it would have been amazing if we could have that, right? If in the past that had happened. But even if you don't, okay, you should put your kimono on and you should attend classes. And in our school, you can even attend classes with your child, right? We have a class where parents and their kids can practice together once a week. But if you don't do it for any reason, be part of their journey. Read the 753 code book. Try to understand. Ask for a meeting with the instructor. Ideally, take a private lesson, even if it's one. Take a private lesson
so
just
you can
to understand.
Understand.
Exactly. Understand the culture. Understand what we're doing here. Jiu-Jitsu is not, with all due respect to these amazing activities, Jiu-Jitsu is not ballet. Jiu-Jitsu is not soccer. Jiu-Jitsu is not basketball.
Can I say why?
Jiu-Jitsu is a way of life. Why?
Because fighting is very serious. It's life and death. In order for you to be able to fight, or even better, in order for you to be able to avoid a fight, you need to be well. More than any other activity, you need to be well physically, you need to be well emotionally, you need to be well intellectually, you need to be well spiritually. If you're not well in all those areas, you're not going to be able to defend yourself. You're not going to be able to survive a dangerous situation. You're not going to be able to handle an emergency, a crisis. As human beings, we have an instinct to survive, to defend ourselves, to fight. Life is a fight. So through these classes, through this philosophy, we can develop the skills to be able to fight. But to fight in a positive way, to fight in a good way, and to be well so that we can win the fight.
Like you said, the fight happens in many fronts. The fight happens in school, to study. The fight happens in our relationships, to do what's right. The fight happens in so many different aspects of our life, and oftentimes still, and it happens to us, when we think of Jiu-Jitsu, when we think of the 753 code, we think of how can this help me win a match? How can this help me improve my arm lock? But when you switch that,
when you flip that switch, you realize that Jiu-Jitsu is complete. That Jiu-Jitsu helps us in every single aspect of our lives. Like our dad used to say, from tying my shoes to the most difficult achievements I've had in my life, Jiu-Jitsu was always present in my journey.
And the reason why Guy said, as a parent, come train Jiu-Jitsu, is because by training, you will be able to use the skills, philosophical skills, and intellectual, spiritual, and physical together as a great tool in the education process of your child.
And you will lead by example, which is the best way to teach.
So we're very early on. Actually, Joaquim, you're still very early on in your parenthood. But how did Jiu-Jitsu, or how has Jiu-Jitsu, and of course the philosophy of Jiu-Jitsu, how has it helped you in these first few weeks?
I think the question is more how it hasn't, because it's present. Everything we do is Jiu-Jitsu, and that's why I think what Guy said is so important, because everything I did from the moment my child was born, or even before he was born, is applying Jiu-Jitsu. And it's interesting because sometimes when you encounter someone that doesn't train Jiu-Jitsu, they're even surprised. In the process, I had people ask me, Joaquim, aren't you nervous? aren't you worried? Aren't you scared? And obviously you feel the responsibility, which I always see it as something that is very empowering and something that is beneficial to me to feel the responsibility. But I felt like Jiu-Jitsu was there to be able to help me through the process, and I think that really changes everything. And going back to the main topic of this podcast, I think that's the number one reason why people are attracted, because Jiu-Jitsu is not a gun. Jiu-Jitsu is not an insurance that you have to pay. Once you learn it's with you, no one can take it from you. You can take it everywhere, and you can lean on in the hardest times in life, and you can lean on in the best times of life. So
Exactly. Directly.
With that said, I think we should end the podcast.
You wanna silence me?
No, it was just such a great.
Yeah. I just wanted to compliment if I can, but it directly affects how we feel, especially in difficult moments.
Yes. Thank you so much. Once again, if you have any questions, suggestions that you want us to discuss, please send us our way via the comments, and also don't forget to support us and to like our videos and posts and our social media platforms. Thank you so much, and we'll see you very soon.
thank you.
Thank you.